because so it seems to me that so much of the conversation around the universities, um, around sciences and the interaction with the public and public trust and those kinds of things have just been very shallow in their discussions. And this gets to the much deeper question of to the purpose of the universities. If we're talking about the purpose of the universities being the pursuit of the truth, generation of knowledge, passing and teaching the next generation, in here, a related goal, but not the Talos, perhaps. Um, you can you have to then ask, well, what are the virtues that make that work? Are bad researchers bad people? The piece in question here, where I'm reading this title, doesn't exactly go into that per se, but like so many other things, it gets at questions that I and others have been asking or wanting to see asked in the great debates about the purpose of the universities, the role of science, the constraints or lack thereof around free expression, and the like. Some of these things that should be asked, particularly with regards, in this case, to scholars. So we're going to get into this. This is a great piece. Sally Satel, writing for Heterodox STEM here, are bad researchers, bad people. And I think it's worthwhile to think about because she gets into something here at the start that is really important to consider, which is what's called the epistemic virtues. And for those of you who forget, epistemology is basically the study of how we get knowledge. Um, how do we go about acquiring knowledge ourselves? What are proper things to that? So epistemic virtues have to do with those good things we see in people that are about going after knowledge and the pursuit of the truth. So let's get into this here. And I will note this was originally published in the Chronicle of Higher Education, but was republished here. The great naturalist Charles Darwin set a golden rule for his study of nature. Whenever he encountered information that ran counter to his ideas, he would make a note of it, quote, without fail and at once. Why? Because Darwin wrote in his autobiography, quote, such facts and thoughts were far more apt to escape from the memory than favorable ones. Turning his remarkable powers of observation on himself, Darwin discerned that he was more likely to remember confirmatory evidence than findings that refuted his ideas. His golden rule protected him against what we now call confirmation bias, a tendency to favor evidence that validates one's pre existing beliefs. Darwin was practicing intellectual humility. He was aware of his cognitive biases and open to correction. This disposition is one of a suite of epistemic virtues, traits that contribute to intellectual flourishing and accountable belief formation. Now, before I continue here, what I want you to do if you're listening to this is to think about things going on in society around you, in academia currently, in the sciences and what have you, and to take it seriously. How many of these folks are practicing these epistemic virtues? And how many are not? And what is the sort of general trends of society? I have my own thoughts, but before we continue, and I read off what some of these epistemic virtues are, um, this is a point to consider. Where are we in a society? Because, as Jonathan Rauch writes, science, for example, is one of the things in the reality-based community here that we do to get at things that are common that everybody needs to be aware of and get to fundamental truth about things. And so let's consider that as we go forward. What is society around us here, particularly in the United States and in Europe, um, more interested in? Let's say. Such virtues are part of a larger project on intellectual character developed by philosopher Ernest Sosa, a professor of philosophy at Rutgers University. Sosa introduced the notion of virtue epistemology in 1980, in a 1980 paper, The Raft and the Pyramid. It's a complex analysis that, along with his subsequent writing, examines knowledge through the lens of intellectual virtue and highlights the idea of a responsible knower. Taking its inspiration from virtue ethics of the Greco Roman tradition, the practice of ethical decision making and eventual action, virtue epistemology focuses on traits beneficial to intellectual inquiry. In addition to epistemic humility, other virtues, as elaborated by Robert C. Roberts and W. J. Wood in their 2007 book Intellectual Virtues, include open mindedness, love of knowledge, and generosity, specifically here sharing intellectual goods, alongside such traits as intellectual courage, the willingness to consider difficult, unpopular, and counterintuitive ideas, and intellectual firmness, the ability to balance one's belief against letting go in the face of compelling evidence. Virtue has been largely absent from the ongoing discussions about how to cultivate productive conversation and debate on college campuses. Center stage has instead been taken concepts like viewpoint pluralism and political diversity, which have been demonstrated to reduce confirmation bias, enhance creativity, and improve problem solving. More controversially, the hiring of more conservative and heterodox professors has also been widely discussed. Those approaches are necessary, but epistemic virtues also have a role. They don't focus on an individual's ideological or political coloration, nor do they concern an individual's cognitive endowment, such as intelligence, problem-solving ability, or pre-existing knowledge. Rather, they concern character traits. Quote, "A person can be extremely intellectually gifted while also being intellectually arrogant, careless, or lazy," end quote, according to philosopher Joseph Baer at Loyola Marymount University. Quote, "Conversely, a person of mediocre natural intelligence can be highly curious, open, careful, and thorough in her thinking," end quote. Now, this statement in here is very true. And as much as I do appreciate, having some of these discussions, it is a touch shallow. When we're talking about the university, and particularly because, again, as I've mentioned many times, for my purposes here at the channel here, the university is where we train the next generation of scientists. So what kind of virtues should we instill in that next generation of scientists? And this is a really good list of those epistemic virtues: the intellectual humility, the open-mindedness, the love of actually getting new knowledge, the generosity aspect, sharing your intellectual knowledge and intellectual goods freely, alongside the traits of the intellectual courage, being willing rather to consider difficult and unpopular things, and the intellectual firmness. You do have to balance. When is the point of letting go in the face of compelling evidence versus keeping hold of things of the past, or your beliefs of the past? And that is the kind of virtues that should be fostered, in my humble opinion, in the university context when we're training the next generation of scientists, but also other types of scholars, be they philosophers or lawyers or other related scholars. Now ask the question, is that what is being fostered actually at a university? Is that really what is being fostered? And truthfully, I cannot say that is honestly the case necessarily. I'm sure there are professors who are trying very hard to foster those values in their students. And I also think that's not necessarily the case at all. But let's also consider perhaps the broader range of society right now, where there is a distinct desire to affirm everything. Always affirm, always affirm, always affirm, never challenge. How can you have the intellectual courage if you are always affirmed and never challenged? And, do you have an open-mindedness if you're always affirmed? Everybody's subject to confirmation bias, don't get me wrong, but the kind of checks here where you can say, oh, wait, there is actually different information here, I should consider that, is not necessarily something that's fostered nowadays, just in society generally, which I would say is probably a pretty bad thing for a society that is supposed to be reality-based, excuse me. Let us continue. The epistemic virtues have practical implications for research, teaching, uncovering pseudoscience, and reducing political tensions. Psychologist William Donahue at the University of Reno and colleagues contend that their research in their field has that research in their field has been held back by investigators' failure to design and conduct experiments that and report data, quote, in an epistemically virtuous manner. For example, the unvirtuous investigator may deliberately shorten the duration of intervention trials so that the results reflect short-term benefits that may fade over a longer interval. Virtue is also slighted when investigators ignore the impact of attrition. Losing subjects midway through a clinical trial can create an imbalance between treatment groups or between treatment groups and the control, thereby making the final sample unrepresentative of the original participant pool. Another lapse, emphasizing results that are statistically significant, but so small that they have little clinical relevance. Quote, as I see it, good research requires good character, O'Donoghue told me. So, going back to the title of the thing here, what she is getting at is the idea that having these epistemic virtues is itself a good thing in here and connected to doing good research. Encouraging students and the public to be skeptical of pseudoscience draws on core epistemic values. Intellectual humility, for example, is associated with reduced belief in the discredited causal link between vaccines and autism. Data also show that cognitive reflection, a form of intellectual integrity, can equip people to override their gut reactions and detect logical fallacies inherent in most conspiracy theories, which typically involve secret plans by powerful and sinister groups. Virtue epistemology benefits both the scientist and the skeptic, according to philosopher Massimo Pigliucci, I hope I pronounced that, right, of the City University of New York. Quote, it's a way of thinking that recognizes the human nature of scientific knowledge, she told me, because research can never be purely neutral, be a purely neutral view from nowhere. Our focus should be on the kind of practices that make it possible to arrive at the best approximation of the truth. End quote. In the political realm, University of Alabama psychologist Shauna Bowes and colleagues found that intellectually humble individuals are less likely to view themselves as different from members of the opposite party or to consider their ideological opponents immoral and unlikable. Consider that in the vein of things going on today, whether it be folks on the right or folks on the left. And, you know, I think I said this in another video. I'm not so sure that the designations of right and left are all that meaningful anymore. But consider that when you're thinking about it here. They are open and respectful in the face of disagreement. In other work, Bowes and her team found that individuals with higher intellectual humility were less susceptible to confirmation bias when evaluating arguments about global warming and gun control. And those kinds of things like that are really great. This is why intellectual humility is awesome, because you can actually get away from the issues with confirmation bias as much as it's possible. That is a bias that most definitely everybody is susceptible to, even when you practice good intellectual humility. And I'm sure it's hit everybody at some point, me included, in their discussions and arguments on any number of different topics. Hopeful signs. Efforts to instill epistemic virtues, are gaining popularity. Ron Richert of Harvard University advises fellow teachers to manifest intellectual virtues in their own teaching and research by displaying curiosity and intellectual humility and giving a fair hearing to multiple perspectives. They can also explore the lives of intellectually virtuous exemplars from history, literature, film, and contemporary life. Pigliucci of City College has created a checklist for the virtuous skeptic, for his students and for general audiences. Among the questions included on the checklist, he told me, are, quote, did I carefully consider my opponent's arguments and not dismiss them out of hand? Did I interpret what my opponent said in the most charitable way possible before mounting a response? Did I seriously entertain the possibility that I might be wrong? That last question is probably one of the things that needs to be instilled as an epistemic virtue for just about everybody right now when you're looking at things going on in society generally, and most certainly should be one very much instilled for all students and professors at universities and in the sciences. In 2013, Jason Baer and Stephen Porter, a philosopher at Biola University, launched a charter middle school, admission is by lottery, called the Intellectual Virtues Academy in Long Beach, California. The Templeton Foundation was a major supporter. Teachers in all courses, including literature, history, and science, foster 9 master virtues, generally similar to the epistemic virtues enumerated by Robertson Wood. In 2016, the two philosophers established a high school in Long Beach, California, also called Intellectual Virtues Academy. It is accredited by the Western Association of Schools and Colleges and receives some support from California. Although epistemic virtues have been little discussed outside the bounds of philosophy, scientists have always tacitly embraced them. They are the stuff of research ethics, after all. But all forms of scholarship and debate can be strengthened and made more collegial when students and citizens, determined truth seekers all, aspire towards intellectual responsibility. So, her point in this piece is very much around the epistemic virtues and instilling those. And I actually really appreciated this piece, is why I wanted to share it and comment on it, because it seems to me that so much of the conversation around the universities, um, around sciences and the interaction with the public and public trust and those kinds of things have just been very shallow in their discussions. And this gets to the much deeper question of, to the purpose of the universities, if we're talking about the purpose of the universities being the pursuit of the truth, generation of knowledge, passing and teaching the next generation, in here, a related goal, but not the talos, perhaps. You can you have to then ask, well, what are the virtues that make that work? What are the good virtues that we need to instill in people to get those things to work? What are not the good virtues? What are the right virtues, rather, to help make those things work in all generations? And those things here, the intellectual humility, the courage, all of that were talked about in this piece are really great examples of what those should be. And I'd be curious to know if you all can think of any others. Those seem like an excellent list to me. But yeah, I found this to be a really fascinating piece to actually dive into some of the epistemic virtues we need to talk about and how perhaps those should be instilled in the next generation of students going on to be scientists. So let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. Stay curious.